From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
But the thing that happened was that very soon after I won the Booker Prize, the BJP government came to power, did the nuclear tests. So I wrote The End of Imagination, which was the first essay condemning the tests, and of course that was the end of my romance as the face of the new India.
As Donald Trump welcomes Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the White House, we'll hear from one of India's most famous writers, Arundhati Roy. Plus, we'll look at what's at stake in today's meeting, from the sale of surveillance drones to immigration. Then we go to Jackson, Mississippi.
What happens in Jackson, Mississippi impacts each and every one of us. And so we have to make the decision that we're going to start controlling the way electoral politics proceeds. And so we've made the decision that we're going to be the most radical city on the planet.
We'll speak to the mayor-elect of Jackson, Mississippi, Chokwe Lumumba. He was just elected to fill the post once held by his father, who was dubbed America's most revolutionary mayor before his death in 2014. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On Capitol Hill, opposition to the Republican health care pill is growing as an increasing number of Republican senators come out against their party's plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. The bill is facing criticism both from Republicans who say the bill includes too many cuts to Medicaid, as well as from those who say it doesn't go far enough to gut the Affordable Care Act. So far, 5 Republicans currently say they'll not support the bill as written. Nevada Senator Dean Heller, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, Utah Senator Mike Lee, and Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who called for the vote on the bill to be postponed.
There's no way we should be voting on this next week. No way. There's no way.
Are you going to work to stop
folks
it?
in Wisconsin,
Are you going to work to stop a vote next week?
I have a hard time believing Wisconsin constituents or even myself will have enough time to properly evaluate this for me to vote for a motion to proceed. So I've been encouraging leadership, the White House, anybody I can talk to for quite some time. Let's not rush this process.
Republicans have been pushing for a vote on the bill this week ahead of the July 4th recess. The Republican health care plan would remove millions of low-income and disabled people from Medicaid, cut subsidies to purchase health insurance, allow states to effectively eliminate protections for people with pre-existing conditions, and defund Planned Parenthood for a year. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the bill would also give $33 billion in tax cuts to the 400 richest U.S. households. It's facing opposition not only from Republican senators, but also from all Senate Democrats, a slew of governors from both parties, the majority of the healthcare industry, hospitals, doctors, nurses, patient advocacy groups, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and even members of the far-right Koch brothers political network who claim the legislation is not sufficiently conservative. Over the weekend, progressive groups held Don't Take Our Healthcare rallies in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Charleston, West Virginia, and in Columbus, Ohio, where Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders called the Republicans' plan beyond comprehension.
And while 28 million people are uninsured, this bill will throw an additional 23 million people off of the health care they have, raising the total of uninsured in America to over 50 million people. This is literally beyond comprehension. It is unconscionable, and it must not be allowed to happen.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and others are calling for a single-payer health care system, also known as Medicare for All, though he hasn't introduced a formal bill yet. A recent poll by the Pew Research Center shows support for single payers growing, with a full third of Americans in favor of a national single-payer system. However, on Friday, California Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon shelved a proposal to establish a single-payer system across California, saying the bill will not be voted on this year. It was approved in the California State Senate. The Washington Post is reporting President Obama received a highly classified eyes-only letter in August detailing Russian President Vladimir Putin was directly involved in a cyber campaign with the objective of defeating Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton and helping elect her opponent, now President Donald Trump. The Post investigation is based on interviews with current and former unnamed government officials. The report also chronicles President Obama's attempts to punish Russia for the alleged interference in the U.S. election, including by imposing sanctions, expelling 35 Russian diplomats, closing 2 Russian compounds in the U.S., and a covert measure to plant cyber weapons in Russia's infrastructure. The New York Times printed a full-page report detailing every lie President Trump has told since taking office Friday. The dozens of statements chronicled in the ad include Trump lying about his position in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Trump lying about how many times he's been on the cover of Time magazine, Trump lying about the size of his inauguration crowds, and Trump lying about widespread voter fraud that, in fact, never took place. And those are only the lies Trump told in his first week in office. The report includes an infographic showing Trump either lied or issued misleading statements every single day for his first 40 days in office. Workers at the Carriers plant in Indianapolis, Indiana, are bracing themselves for a massive round of layoffs next month, despite the fact President Trump had claimed he'd save the jobs at the plant. As many as 600 workers will be laid off next month. President Trump had also announced a $16 million investment in the plant, allegedly to save jobs. But in fact, Carrier's parent company says money is going to go to factory automation, which will actually reduce the number of jobs at the plant overall. Meanwhile, car manufacturer Ford has announced it will be moving some of its manufacturing operations to China. This comes after Trump tried to claim credit for Ford's decision earlier this spring to cancel its plans to build a factory in Mexico, tweeting, quote, "Big announcement by Ford today, major investment to be made in 3 Michigan plants, car companies coming back to U.S., jobs, jobs, jobs," he tweeted. In fact, Ford simply decided to outsource the jobs to China. The United Nations says Yemen is now facing the world's worst cholera outbreak as the U.S.-backed Saudi-led bombing and naval blockade has devastated Yemen's health, water, and sewer systems. The World Health Organization says more than 200,000 people in Yemen are infected with cholera. 1,300 people have already died, a quarter of them children. Meanwhile, in more news on Yemen, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed Freedom of Information Act requests for records on U.S. involvement in a secret network of prisons in southern Yemen, where dozens of people, including children, have reportedly been forcibly detained, tortured, and interrogated. The Associated Press reports U.S. military officials have participated in interrogations in detention centers where torture is routine and extreme. For a full discussion on this issue, you can go to democracynow.org. In Iraq, U.S.-backed Iraqi forces continue the battle to seize control of the city of Mosul from ISIS. Residents say at least 5 members of the same family were killed on Sunday in a U.S.-led coalition airstrike. Thousands continued to flee Mosul over the weekend. This is Fatima Mohammed.
The house was bombed and collapsed as she was inside. We were neighbors. She came out running and yelling, and she said that her mom was buried under the rubble. I took her and washed her face, and I went out carrying a white banner. But no one came to my help. We were exhausted, hungry, and thirsty.
Meanwhile, 2 more journalists have died from injuries sustained when a mine exploded in Mosul. Swiss journalist Véronique Robert and French video journalist Stéphane Villeneuve. The explosion immediately killed Iraqi journalist Bakhtiar Haddad. In Syria, U.S.-backed troops captured a district of western Raqqa from ISIS over the weekend. The local journalistic group Raqqa is being slaughtered silently reports U.S.-led coalition airstrikes killed at least 5 civilians Saturday in Raqqa. A man named Khalil al-Sharabi, along with his wife, as well as another man named Khalil al-Bari, his wife and one of their sons. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the U.S.-led coalition airstrikes have killed nearly 700 civilians in and around Raqqa since the campaign to take control of the city began in March. Meanwhile, critics are warning the United States is quietly expanding its military role in Syria with an increasing number of strikes against the Syrian government. The U.S. has shot down at least 1 Syrian government plane and 2 Iranian-made drones this month. The dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, Vali Nasser, warns, quote, "We are sleepwalking into a much broader military mandate without saying what we plan to do afterward," unquote. As many as 50,000 protesters formed a human chain that stretched across parts of Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands Sunday to demand Belgium shut down 2 nuclear reactors. The reactors are more than 30 years old and have been temporarily shut down twice in recent years after cracks were discovered in the core tanks. In Pakistan, more than 150 people were killed when a fuel tanker exploded on Sunday in Bahawalpur in the eastern province of Punjab. The majority of those killed were nearby residents who gathered to collect the fuel spilling out of the tanker, which had crashed on the side of the road. Another 100 people were wounded in the explosion. In Colombia, at least 13 people have died in a mine explosion in the town of Conocumba in central Colombia Friday. Government officials say the mine was not permitted and lacked safety equipment. Back in the United States, the second mistrial has been declared in the murder case of former University of Cincinnati police officer Ray Tensing, who shot African-American Samuel DuBose in the head after pulling him over for having a missing front license plate in 2015. Tensing was wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with the Confederate battle flag under his uniform when he killed DuBose. This is the second time a jury has deadlocked on Officer Tensing's case. It comes after prosecutors failed to win convictions in two other high-profile cases of police killing civilians. In Minnesota, police officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted of manslaughter for killing African-American motorist Philando Castile. In Milwaukee, police officer Dominique Hagan Brown was acquitted of charges of reckless homicide for shooting and killing 23-year-old African-American Sylville Smith. Meanwhile, in Dallas, a grand jury has indicted police officer Christopher Hess on charges of aggravated assault for killing 21-year-old Genevieve Dawes in January after he fired 13 shots into her car through the passenger side window. Dawes was pregnant at the time she was killed by Officer Hess. Thousands of people marched in pride celebrations across the U.S. and the world over the weekend. In New York City, formerly imprisoned Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning celebrated her first pride as a free woman, riding in a red convertible with the American Civil Liberties Union, alongside transgender teenager Gavin Grimm, who has sued his local Virginia high school district for the right to use the bathroom that matches his gender identity. And in Western Massachusetts, 98-year-old activist Francis Crowe and 7 others were arrested blockading construction of a Kinder Morgan gas pipeline in the Otis State Forest on Saturday. Activists helped push Crowe to the construction site in her wheelchair, where they then held a mock funeral for fossil fuels. Francis Crowe is a longtime peace and anti-nuclear activist. This is her 3rd arrest since she turned 90 years old. When asked on Saturday how many times she'd been arrested throughout her lifetime, Crowe answered, "Not enough." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump is welcoming Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the White House for their first face-to-face meeting. Modi is head of the Hindu nationalist BJP party and has led India since 2014. Modi was once banned from the United States on charges he did not intervene in a massacre against Muslims in 2002 when he headed the Indian state of Gujarat. The meeting comes just days after the White House announced a $2 billion deal to sell India 22 Guardian surveillance drones. The deal will help India expand its use of drones in occupied Kashmir as well as along the Pakistani border. In addition, Lockheed Martin has just announced a deal to begin making F-16 fighter jets in India. Another top agenda item of today's Trump-Modi meeting is the future of the H-1B visa program, which thousands of Indian computer engineers use each year to come to the United States. In April, President Trump signed an executive order to review the visa program. Many observers have compared Trump to Modi. In January, Steve Cole wrote in the New Yorker magazine, quote, "Trump will join Modi as the latest figure in the world's swelling ranks of populist nationalist leaders, a gallery of strong men in countries rich and poor, some more democratic and some less so, who govern partly through intimidation and a certain curated arbitrariness," unquote. To talk more about today's meeting, we're joined by 2 guests. Teesta Setalvad is a civil rights activist and journalist based in Mumbai, India. She's the Secretary of Citizens for Justice and Peace. And here in New York, Prachi Patankar, co-founder of the South Asia Solidarity Initiative. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Prachi, let's begin with you. Talk about the significance of this meeting today between Trump, the President of the United States, and Modi.
Well, I think just like any of the other predecessors of these leaders of these countries, U.S. and India, I imagine they'll talk about similar long-term issues in like economic trade deals and nuclear deals. And I think, like you mentioned, they'll talk about the arms deal that they're about to sign. And of course, given the latest pulling of from the climate deal that Trump saw, that they will talk about that as well. But what differentiates these two leaders from the past leaders is that they come together as for their authoritarianism. Modi led the way a few years ago, coming into power, led by very much kind of fascistic and Hindu fundamentalist regime, followed by what he did in Gujarat. And I think that this is what brings them together. Another thing that also brings them together is their kind of populist and symbolic rhetoric. So Trump has the Make America Great Again symbolic idea that he campaigned on. But Modi also talks about Make in India. So they're both kind of these nationalists, keep jobs at home, talk about the economy in that way. But what is happening within their home countries, as we know, Modi announced actually on the U.S. election day in November, the demonetization, the disastrous demonetization policy, which had disastrous consequences for the poor and marginalized people of India, many of them farmers and Dalits, who are the most lowest rung of the caste society in India. And those people are, resisting these policies. As we see that in my home state, in Maharashtra, there was a farmer strike because farmers have faced the brunt of these policies as well.
Let's go to Tista Setalvad, a civil rights activist and who is based in Mumbai and journalist. Prachi just mentioned Gujarat, but most people, I think, in the United States and perhaps around the world are not familiar with what she's referring to, and you're very involved with this issue. Can you talk about Modi's history?
Yeah, it's very important to understand Modi's history, particularly when we look at the meeting of Modi and Trump, because I think the two world's largest democracies, talking about the democratic will of the people, having come to power in a certain manner, and both representing a certain kind of majoritarianism. Modi, different from Trump in the sense, though I know that Trump's father had links with the Ku Klux Klan, different in the sense that Modi's grooming, political grooming and entire growth has been with an organization called the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Now, people just know a little bit about this. There have been a lot of academic studies and a lot of real issues down at the ground when we have communal violence breaking out. The RSS is an outfit that is proto-fascist, that does not really believe in a constitutional democracy as India is now. So Modi, in a sense, is today a very popular leader for sure, but he comes from the grooming of the RSS that believes in a supremacist India, that believes in differentials in citizenship. So the program of 2002, which Prachi referred to very rightly, was on Modi's watch. It was, it was poor governance at best and brutal at worst. You have almost 2,000 Muslims' lives being killed in reprisal violence after a despicable burning of a coach, which was actually allowed to, in rhetorical terms, to be seen as if Hindu nationalists were being burnt and attacked by Muslims in the city of Godhra. But for virtually 7 months after that, you had reprisal violence and the state just looking on. Modi was chief minister then, and to date, he has not really apologized or even expressed regret for that massacre.
And explain how many people, this was in 2002, with Modi at as the kind of, the equivalent of governor of Gujarat. How many people died? And then what the U.S. action was that followed, banning him from, or refusing to give him a visa to the United States?
You see, this was a very, very successful campaign launched by Indians, expat Indians based in the United States, who actually campaigned there on the issue of the 2002 massacre being a genocidal carnage, and argued that for a man who was chief minister at the state, he should not be allowed to visit the United States of America. And therefore, the ban came through. And the ban was subsequently held repeatedly, even as he rose and became more and more powerful. What we need to remember about Modi is that within 5 years, he won three successful elections in the state of Gujarat on the back of the massacre, which tells you something quite frightening about Indian democracy and possibly all democracies, that we actually go on we travel a way, walk the razor's edge, if you like. The democracy is the will of the people, but the day democracy becomes the rule of the mob and mobocracy and majoritarianism, and you can actually whip up mob hysteria through an election process, which Modi has successfully done in 2002 itself after the massacre, 2007, and then in 2012 again. That is what is a really worrying signal as far as Modi and Trump are concerned, because they represent, in a sense, the democratic will of the people, but they also represent subversion of democratic institutions, which are checks and balances to majoritarianism and supremacism within democracy.
We're talking to Teesta Setalvad, a civil rights activist and journalist based in Mumbai, India. We're speaking to her by Democracy Now! Video stream in Mumbai. And Prachi Patankar, who is here in New York, activist and educator, co-founder of South Asia Solidarity Initiative. Prachi, this $2 billion sale of Guardian drones, the significance of this. I know Modi is going next to Israel and was sort of playing both. In case things didn't go well here, he could get them perhaps from Israel. But talk about the significance of these drones and then the F-16s being built in India.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this is not surprising. U.S. and India have had conversations and relationships around arms deals for almost a decade, and India is also talking with other countries, as you mentioned. But both of these countries have committed grave human rights violations in the places that they have gone to war or occupied. In case of India, we have Kashmir, which is a place where Indian Army has around almost 600,000 troops placed there, and the escalation of human rights violations for the Kashmiri people against the Kashmiri activists and human rights activists there have been going up. And given that this is a worrisome in a move, I also think that given the ongoing conflicts between Pakistan and India, Afghanistan being right there, and Trump talking about increasing intervention in Afghanistan, I think what U.S. is probably thinking is that they need an ally in the region, and India is one of those allies that they probably need.
And now Prime Minister Modi has come out in support of the Climate Accord, right, as becoming a spokesperson around the world around that, and of course Donald Trump pulling out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think Donald Trump pulling out of the climate deal, I think he's seen by the entire world as not necessarily a good thing. I think so. Trump and including India and including China are, I think, seeing themselves and kind of pushing that forward as countries taking a different kind of stand. But I would say in terms of practice, what's happening within India and what Modi has been saying internally, he has been against, he's denied climate change openly. He's made anti-science remarks also in the past. So he certainly doesn't necessarily care about climate change. Within the policies, economic policies in India and development policies, he's been pushing for more fossil fuel extractions, more coal mining projects, and supporting companies that do that. And that has affected millions of people, indigenous people within different places in India, whose lives will be tremendously impacted by some of these development projects.
Well, I want to thank you both for being on with us, and we will continue this discussion as we turn to Arundhati Roy, who is traveling through the United States. Prachi Patankar is activist and educator, co-founder of the South Asia Solidarity Initiative, and Teesta Setalvad is a civil rights activist and journalist based in Mumbai, India. This is Democracy Now! Arundhati Roy up next.
शकीन भाई नच नच सारी रात पट दे जमीन भाई
Basement Bhangra anthem, DJ Rekha here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman as we turn now to one of India's most famous writers, Arundhati Roy. 20 years after her debut novel, The God of Small Things, made her a literary sensation, but she turned away from fiction, became a leading critic of U.S. empire, the wars in the Middle East, the rise of Hindu nationalism in India, writing about them in nonfiction. Now Arundhati Roy has returned to fiction, has just released her second novel. It's titled The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Well, last week, Democracy Now!'s Nermeen Sheikh and I sat down with Arundhati Roy in our New York studio. I asked her how winning the Booker Prize, at the time she was the youngest writer ever to win it, affected her life as a writer.
Well, it was obviously, thrilling to win the Booker Prize. It wasn't something that I, had thought about as being even a possibility. But after that, it became complicated because if you actually become very well known and then let's say you move to a place, London or New York, where lots of well-known international people live, then it's a different story. But if you want to carry on living where you lived and being with your old friends, all of them have to deal with the Booker Prize and the fame, and it's really hard. But it's okay. But the thing that happened was that very soon after I won the Booker Prize, the BJP government came to power, did the nuclear tests. And I was, at that point, on the cover of every magazine. I was the face of this new India. And then the new India, to my mind, suddenly turned ugly. The public discourse after those tests became overtly nationalist, overtly ugly. Things that could not have been said, even if they were thought publicly, were now acceptable. And if I hadn't stepped off that train, I would have been part of it. I didn't have the space to be neutral, or as Howard Zinn says, you can't be neutral on a moving train, but especially not if you're suddenly famous, So I wrote The End of Imagination, which was the first essay condemning the tests, and of course that was the end of my romance as the face of the new India.
I remember when you came to the United States after writing one of your essays around the Iraq War. You were fierce in your criticism of President Bush. You held a news conference, and I can't remember which women's magazine came up to you after, or maybe I can, and said, "Can we just follow you shopping?"
Oh, really? I don't remember that. Really?
But what it means to be a kind of star like that as you're taking on these critical issues.
Well, it's, the thing is that I've now been baptized in fire, because I've had so much happen in the course of the political writing. I mean, just last month, based on some fake news in a Pakistani website saying that I had said something in Kashmir, a BJP member of parliament suggested that instead of the Kashmiri man, I should be used as a human shield in Kashmir, So, but that's all part of how they are with a lot of women who stand up to them. There's that whole thing going on. And but eventually it just makes you more sharp, I think. I mean, people call me fearless and all that. I'm not fearless. I think it's stupid to be fearless, really. You have to be extremely fearful, extremely knowledgeable about the possible consequences, and then do what you're doing.
People wrote in around the world when they heard you were going to be on. Abdullah Abdusalam in Nigeria wrote something that is sounds like it fits right in with what you're saying. Said, "I would like to ask Arundhati Roy how she copes with the hatred against her in India and how we can combat the tyranny of opinion in the world today."
Well, see, the thing is that, the hatred is also a bit exaggerated because they have these troll factories. You know, they have it's a factory product too. You know, so it exaggerates the extent. When I walk on the streets, I certainly don't feel hated in India, but they would like
well, you're
to,
revered as well.
They would like to project it as such, you know, and there are many people in India who are standing up to what's going on there. Many people more vulnerable than me too, you know. So it's a remarkable country for that reason. You know, students, there were so much trouble in the campuses last year, you know, so they would like me to portray myself as some lone warrior, the sole voice. That's not true. I'm just one of many people who believe the things I believe, you know. I mean, many people don't write the novels, but many people do believe. There would be something wrong with my politics if I was really just a lone person. I am in the heart of a crowd.
Well, it seems that with the publication of this book, you can expect only more fame, because the book is already due to be translated into at least 30 languages. And I want to go to what some of the reviewers of this book who've suggested that there may be analogies between the Ministry of Utmost Happiness and other Indian novelists writing in English. But it strikes us that you may have a greater affinity to writers like the Uruguayan novelist and journalist Eduardo Galeano, who died in 2015. 2 years before he died in 2013, Democracy Now! Spoke to Galeano in our New York studio. Let's go to a clip.
I didn't receive a formal education. I was educated in the Montevideo cafe, in the cafes of Montevideo. There I received my first lessons in the art of telling stories, the storytelling. I was very, very young and sat at one table, neighbor of other table of people, old people or more or less old, and they were telling stories, and I was hearing, because they were very good storytellers, anonymous. We have a memory cut in pieces, and I write trying to recover our real memory, the memory of humankind, what I call the human rainbow, which is much more colorful and beautiful than the other one, the other rainbow. But the human rainbow had been mutilated by machismo, racism, militarism, and a lot of other isms who have been terribly killing our greatness, our possible greatness, our possible beauty.
So that's Eduardo Galeano, the Uruguayan writer who passed away in 2015. So could you tell us
dearly, yes.
And so could you tell us about him and the possible affinities between your work and his?
Well, Eduardo was a master of the shattered story, even though I don't think he wrote fiction. As far as I know, he never wrote any novels. But he wrote a beautiful book called The Open Veins of Latin America. And he had that, I think, you know, perhaps he had that way of making realism magical without being a magical realist, you know. What a writer he was, and what a seer. Wonderful.
That's on the back of your book, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, that quote of yours, how to tell a shattered story by slowly becoming everybody, no, by slowly becoming everything. Explain what you mean by shattered story and that quote.
Well, that's actually a little scribble in one of Thilo's many notebooks, so it's in quotes. But what do I mean? Well, I think what I mean is that the power of telling a story which is not a subject heading, you know, a story that is not afraid of looking at the connections, like Eduardo was saying, you know, is there a connection between the new emerging, great economy, nuclear superpower, and patriarchy? Is there a connection between the rise of the Hindu right, what is happening in Kashmir, how women are treated, what's happening? I mean, that we are a society that practices caste, which is the most institutionalized form of hierarchy, and yet few people write about it. It's like writing about apartheid. South Africa, omitting to mention there was apartheid. But what is the connection between the way women are treated and all these things that I mentioned? If you write books where each of them is a subject heading, an academic piece or journalism, you don't understand fully the rainbow that he's talking about. Not a beautiful one, necessarily, sometimes. But so that's what I mean. This is what makes up the air we breathe. And so it's a shattered story, but actually, if you want to breathe in that air, you have to become everything, you know, and the creatures, and the fact that perhaps the most profound political education I received was in the Narmada Valley, and the understanding of what big dams do to rivers, to populations, to fish. It was not just about human beings and progress and development, but, you know, a mind that looks at a river and thinks, I must pour tons and tons of cement into it. But how a river that belongs to a civilization, the water can be centralized, and then once it's centralized, it can be controlled, and once it's controlled, it can be given to the hotel industry or to the golf courses instead of to the people who lived and grew crops by its banks. And you can say that this is development, you know? So you have to become that river too.
You also take on many controversies that may not be as controversial where you are, but you come to the United States. Abortion is a centerpiece of a Republican plan to dismantle women's health care, particularly focused on Planned Parenthood. There's an abortion in this book.
Yes. But that's, I mean, it is not controversial in India. But it's always interesting to see how the same people who are happy to bomb whole countries to smithereens, to massacre people, to destroy whole populations, suddenly begin to talk about abortion in this way, you know, and it's the same in India. I mean, I remember watching people demonstrating outside the Irish embassy because an Indian woman who could not get an abortion had died in Dublin, and they were the same people who are celebrating the massacre of women in Gujarat. Yesterday, by the way, in the Brooklyn Academy, you know who was present? The daughter of Ehsan Jafri, the member of the Legislative Assembly who was hacked to death in 2002 Gujarat. His wife, Zakia Jafri, has spent all these years in court after court trying to get justice.
And she was at your reading last night at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Explain the significance of that. And, you know, we're leading right up to President Trump meeting Prime Minister Modi on Monday.
Ehsan Jafri was obviously a Muslim, but he was a trade union leader and a former member of the Legislative Assembly in Gujarat in 2002. And when the burning of the Hindu pilgrims on a train, when the mobs decided that collective punishment of the Muslim community was the answer to that and started to massacre Muslims on the streets, rape women, and so on, something like 60 people sheltered in Ehsan Jafri's very middle-class home in a housing colony in Ahmedabad, hoping that, you know, because he was a politician, he would be able to save them. A mob gathered. Ehsan Jafri made 200 phone calls to all the politicians. The police came and went. Nobody did anything. He came out of his house to reason with the mob, to ask them to at least spare the women and children. They hacked him to death. They killed him, and then they killed everybody else. And then the killers boasted about this on camera. right? And his daughter was there at the reading yesterday.
And what was Modi's role at this time?
Modi was the chief minister of Gujarat at the time, so he was the man responsible for law and order at the time. And when he was campaigning, and then he, of course, it was very close to elections. Most massacres in India are very close to elections, and they. But they polarized the vote, and so he won the elections. And when he was campaigning for Prime Minister, Reuters asked him whether he regretted what had happened under his stewardship in Gujarat in 2002. And he said, I mean, I don't remember the exact words, but he said something like, even if I was driving a car and a puppy came under my wheels, I would regret it.
Yeah, one of the things he said is, I feel sad. He's quoted by a British author and TV producer saying, I feel sad about what happened, but no guilt. And no court has come even close to establishing it.
Yeah, so the point is that it's not about legal, I mean, if you cannot establish a hands-on legal link that you're really involved in any of it, but you were the chief minister, you do have a moral responsibility. I mean, it's not about just, legal recourse has never helped the onset of this kind of majoritarianism and fundamentalism.
I mean, that is Arundhati Roy, author of the new book, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. We go on with that interview, and we brought you part 1 last week. To see it all, you can go to democracynow.org. Arundhati Roy has written The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, her second fiction book, her second novel, since 20 years ago when she wrote The God of Small Things. Arundhati Roy is traveling the country. On June 27th, she will be at Town Hall in Seattle, and on June 28th at the Norse Theater in San Francisco. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Jackson, Mississippi. A new mayor is being sworn in a week from today. We'll speak with him. Stay with us. Ciao Baby by Red Bharat here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we end the show today in Jackson, Mississippi, where just 1 week from today, social justice activist and attorney Chokwe Antar Lumumba will be sworn in as Jackson's next mayor. Earlier this month, Lumumba won the general election in a landslide after handily winning a primary election in May. This is Chokwe Antar Lumumba celebrating his general election victory with supporters.
Free the land.
Chokwe Lumumba is the son of the late Jackson Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, a longtime Black nationalist organizer and attorney dubbed America's most revolutionary mayor before his death in 2014. The 34-year-old Chokwe Antar Lumumba supports Economic Democracy's proposed a civic incubator fund to support cooperative member-owned businesses in Jackson. Shortly after his election, Lumumba was a featured speaker just a few weeks ago at the People's Summit in Chicago.
I bring greetings from Jackson, Mississippi, where I have recently been named mayor-elect of Jackson, Mississippi. In this process, we defeated a field of 16 people. We were able to secure the general election with 94% of the vote. And more important than that, we did so on a people's platform. On a people's platform where from the moment we announced, we did so saying that we were running on an agenda of social justice, of economic democracy, and working with people, making certain that people had a voice. And that's our story, and we're sticking to it. As we look at the condition of our country, as we consider the fact that we're in Trump times, we have all kinds of questions of what that means. And when I've been confronted with the question of how do you feel in Jackson, Mississippi after the Trump election, what I had to share with people is after the Wednesday after the election, I woke up in Jackson, Mississippi. And what that means is no matter whether our country has experienced great booms or busts, in Mississippi, we've always been at the bottom. And so what that means is that we have to decide that we are going to rescue ourselves. That in places of like Jackson, Mississippi, we won't allow it to become havens of oppression which endanger all of us. So what happens in Jackson, Mississippi impacts each and every one of us. And so we have to make the decision that we're going to start controlling the way electoral politics proceeds. And so we've made the decision that we're going to be the most radical city on the planet. That we're going to make certain that we change the whole scope of electoral politics. No longer will we allow an individual to step before us and tell us all of the great things that they're going to accomplish on our behalf, only to find that nothing in their past demonstrates a sincerity, a willingness, or an ability to do so. What we must do in Jackson, Mississippi, in D.C., in Maryland, in Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, Illinois, is we have to start drafting an agenda for ourselves. Creating an agenda, creating what we want to see, and then we draft the leadership which represents our agenda. And so we're excited about this energy which is surfacing. But it is time that we concretize it, that we take it from the mystical, from the mysterious, and put it into action and see what we can demonstrate when progressive people come together and have a plan and decide how we're going to change the very scope of this world. And so we have to come to the same understanding that Martin Luther King came to in his last days. Martin had a conversation with Harry Belafonte not long before he died. And what Martin told Harry, he said, "Listen, Harry, we're going to win this integration struggle. But I'm beginning to wonder if we're not integrating into a burning house." He said, "I see a system which is abusing labor and abusing working people." And he said, "I'm worried about integrating into a house that looks like that." He said, if people can't be fed, if people can't take care of their families, then it is useless to walk Mississippi roads together. And so ultimately, it becomes greater than a question of color and more a question of ideas. And what are the best ideas? And what are the worst ideas? And what the worst ideas are is that you can be oppressive to anyone. And so we now demand that our leadership looks at how we include the people's voice in the process. And that we have two choices. We have a choice of economics by the people and for the people, or economics by a few people for themselves. And so we're demanding right now that we begin to rescue ourselves. Right now, as my comrade said, we have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you so much.
That was Jackson, Mississippi Mayor-elect Chokwe Antar Lumumba speaking earlier this month at the People's Summit in Chicago. Well, he joins us now live from Jackson, Mississippi. Mayor-elect Lumumba, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm happy to be on your program with you today.
So 1 week from today, you're going to be sworn in as the next mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. Talk about your plans. What are going to be your first actions in office?
Well, Amy, we're putting together, we have a transition team that's in place right now and looking at the issues which Jackson is facing, making certain that we don't make plans just off conjecture, but a fact-based analysis of where we find our city and bringing together not only people who have the acumen and ability and skill to do the job, but people who have a passion which goes beyond just the way we see electoral politics, but a passion to change people's lives. And part of that process is putting together a budget. Shortly after we take office, we have to pass a budget. And so it's important that we have the right people in place. One of the symbolic measures that we're going to take immediately as we take office is a citywide cleanup. It's more than just, taking care of the aesthetic appeal of our city. It's about unifying the city. It's about bringing people from all areas of the city together and taking a collective interest in how our city looks. I harken back to the words of my mother, if you don't care for your house, no one else will. And so we're going to take those easy first steps that is symbolic of where we're going and the direction we're headed in collectively.
You referred to your mother. Can you talk about the origins of your name, Chokwe Antar Lumumba?
Amy, I couldn't hear you. My earpiece.
Can you talk about
Can you please repeat that question?
The origins of your name, Chokwe Antar Lumumba?
So my father changed his name when he was in law school and accepted a name that he believed to be more culturally identifiable. Chokwe is the name of a tribe in the Angola region, a tribe that was resistant to the slave trade. The name Chokwe means hunter. Antar is the name of a historic poet and warrior who died while saving a woman from drowning. And Antar means poet and warrior. Lumumba, I'm given that name from our namesake, Patrice Lumumba, the former prime minister of the Congo, and Lumumba means gifted.
And can you talk about, your rise to to becoming mayor of Jackson is very interesting because the incumbent mayor, Tony Yarber, won the special election against you in 2014, the race that determined who would finish your father's term after he died in office. Your thoughts about losing to him then, but defeating him in this race, what changed?
Well, as I've shared with many people, hindsight is 20/20, and I'm actually grateful that we lost the election in 2014, not because the sincerity was not there, not because we don't believe we could have done a good job, but we've been able to, appreciate far more that's going on with the city of Jackson, and I've been able to appreciate more within myself. People have to remember in 2014, not only did I bury my father in a 2-month time span and then enter into an election, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And so there was a world of change. You had a first-time candidate who had not run for junior class president, much less mayor of a city. And so we've been able to gather more information and position ourselves better. And so everything happens in a perfect timing. And so we're happy where we find ourselves at this time to move forward the agenda that my father embarked on, an agenda of a people's platform, one that was not only symbolic of his work in his short term as mayor, but symbolic of his work, a lifetime of work that he subscribed to and also ultimately dedicated his family towards.
I want to go back to your father, Chokwe Lumumba. In June 2013, I interviewed him just after he was elected mayor.
There are some people historically who have always tried to separate the populations and to have a certain portion of the population oppress the rest of the population. we're not going to tolerate that. We're going to move ahead. We're going to let everyone participate in this movement forward. We're going to invite everyone to participate in this movement forward. And we have formed like a people's assembly. That's key to what we've done here, where we have every 3 months, the population can come out and participate in open forum to say what's on their mind.
That was Chokwe Lumumba in 2013 when he was mayor-elect in the very same studio that you, Mayor-elect Lumumba, are sitting in right now. In that speech we just played that you gave at the People's Summit, where I first met you just a few weeks ago in Chicago, you said we're going to be the most radical city on the planet. What does that look like?
It looks like a plan where we change the way we view electoral politics. In that speech I spoke about not accepting someone's agenda for our lives, but creating one ourselves. So giving people more control of their governance is what that looks like. It's an inclusive process. Sometimes when we use the word radical, people find themselves in fear and question whether they're a part of that radical agenda. And that's exactly our plan, is to incorporate more people, giving people voice who have not had it. That is a shift from what we've seen in traditional politics. It's usually the lay of the land is given to those who are most privileged. And so we're trying to incorporate more people in the process, give voice to the voiceless. And it starts with identifying, the areas of greatest need. We need to, show our workers, our city workers, and even the unionized work that we need. We need to show people dignity and respect in their jobs, and also see the economic benefit of it. Well, Jackson is like many cities. It does not have a problem producing wealth. It has a problem maintaining wealth. And so if you put more money in the people's hands that live and work here, you stand a greater chance of receiving it back. And so we're also going to look at practical solutions to our problems. It is about forming relationships. It is about operational unity and making certain that you can work with people who may historically find themselves on the opposite end of a struggle that you may be engaged in, such as the state, such as a Trump administration. And so you want to identify your common ends and see how you exploit those common goals in order to arrive at the solutions that benefit us all. But it's also about how you make better use of the resources you have. What we look at as
Mayor-elect, I'm going to interrupt just because we only have a minute.
Yes.
And I want to ask, Jackson drew a lot of attention earlier this year when Daniela Vargas, who was a 22-year-old undocumented immigrant, was arrested by ICE after she had just held a news conference. Her pending application for renewal of DACA status, it was pending. Is Jackson going to be a sanctuary city?
Jackson is going to be a city which protects human rights for human beings. I don't care whether your ancestors arrived on the Mayflower or whether you joined us more recently. You deserve the same protections and respect in this city. And so we find ourselves in interesting times where the word sanctuary becomes a negative phrase. I'm proud of the work my father did in order to secure an anti-racial profiling ordinance in the city, and we will continue to protect everyone who lives within our city and make certain that they're not harassed.
The issue of police accountability. In the last weeks, we have seen 2 police officers acquitted or cases with mistrials around the killing of African-American motorists. Your thoughts?
I think we have a criminal justice system in our country which is entirely out of hand. It's the largest business going, and the fact that we've made the criminal justice system into more of an industry, it provides or creates a culture that allows for people to be harassed, killed, and shuffled in like cattle.
We have 10 seconds.
That encourages an environment of police brutality. And so what we want to do is be ahead of the curve in the city of Jackson. We want to see
we're going to have to leave it there. I thank you so much, and we'll cover the day you become mayor.